Good day, everyone. Today, I will be discussing about the World Trade Organization and liberalization. To begin with, let me first discuss what is World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization is the only global international organization dealing with the rules of trade between nations. At its heart are the World Trade Agreements, negotiated and signed by the bulk of the world's trading nation and ratified in their parliaments. World Trade Organization was founded on January 1, 1995, whose headquarters is located in Geneva, Switzerland. Currently, it has 164 member nations. The World Trade Organization creates and embodies the ground rules for global trade among member nations, offering a system for international commerce. So, the function of World Trade Organization, or the overriding objective. The World Trade Organization's overriding objective is to help trade flow smoothly, freely, and predictably. It does this by, letter A, administering trade agreements. Letter B, acting as a forum for trade negotiations. Letter C, setting trade disputes. Letter D, reviewing national trade policies. And letter E, build the trade capacity of developing economies. And letter F, cooperating with other international organizations. Meaning, World Trade Organization facilitates trade agreements and disputes among member nations, acting as the mediator to the member nations involved. Because of this organization, trade negotiations are protected, national trade policies are under review, and the trade capacity of developing economies are being built, and most especially, there is cooperation with other international organizations. Okay, so we're done with the meaning and the overriding objective of World Trade Organization. Let's now proceed with trade liberalization or liberalization. So what is trade liberalization? It means the removal or reduction of restrictions or barriers on the free exchange of goods between nations. These barriers include tariffs, such as duties and surcharges, and non-tariff barriers, such as licensing rules and quotas. So, let's now proceed to global trade rules. Okay, so global rules of trade provide assurance and stability. Consumers and producers know they can enjoy secure supplies and greater choice of the finished products, components, raw materials, and services they use. Producers and exporters know foreign markets will remain open to them. This leads to a more prosperous, peaceful, and accountable economic world. Decisions in the World Trade Organizations are typically taken by consensus among all members, and they are ratified by members' parliaments. Trade fictions are channeled into the World Trade Dispute Settlement process, where the focus is on interpreting agreements and commitments and how to ensure that members' trade policies conform with them. That way, the risk of disputes spilling over into political or military conflict is reduced. By lowering trade barriers through negotiations among member governments, the World Trade Organization system also breaks down other barriers between people and trading economies. At the heart of the system, known as the multilateral trading system discussed by my co-member, which is Sir Richard, are the World Trade Organization's agreements negotiated and signed by a large majority of the world trading economies and ratified in their parliament. These agreements are the legal foundations for global trade. Essentially, they are contracts guaranteeing World Trade Organization members important trade rights. They also bind governments to keep their trade policies transparent and predictable, which is to everybody's benefit. The agreements provide a stable and transparent framework to help producers of goods and services, exporters and importers conduct their business. So the goal is to improve the welfare of the peoples of the World Trade Organization's members. So now, let's proceed to World Trade Agreements. How can you ensure that trade is as fair as possible and as open as practical? Okay, by negotiating rules and abiding by them. That's the answer. So the World Trade Organization's rules, the agreements, are the result of negotiations between the members. The current set is largely the outcome of the 1986 to 94 Uruguay round negotiations, which included a major revision of the original General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or what we call GATT. The Uruguay round created new rules for dealing with trade and services and intellectual property and new procedures for dispute settlement. The complete set runs to some 30,000 pages, consisting of about 30 agreements and separate commitments called schedules, made by individual members in specific areas such as lower tariffs and services market opening. Through these agreements, World Trade Organization members operate a non-discriminatory trading system that spells out their rights and their obligations. Each member receives guarantees that exports will be treated fairly and consistently in other members' markets. Each promise to do the same for imports into its own market. The system also gives developing economies some flexibility in implementing their commitments. Now that I have briefly discussed with you the definition, the rules and agreements of World Trade Organization, let us dig deeper on how the world trade and trade liberalization affects our economy, and so as the world economy as well. As we all know, our country, the Philippines, is one of the members of World Trade Organization. Thus, the international movement towards open market prompted by the World Trade Organization has its premise that trade liberalization will benefit all those who are concerned. Each of the member nation, including the Philippines, will be able to exploit each position of comparative advantage. In particular, the liberalization of trade restrictions and advent of World Trade Organization in recent times have expanded the trade between the international communities. This, as a matter of fact, traces the different factors responsible for this phenomenon, as well as the impact of liberalization of trade on developing countries, including the Philippines. Now, let's proceed to the concept of liberalization. Progressive elimination of government control over economic activities is known as liberalization. So when we say liberalization, it refers to freedom to business enterprises from excessive government control, to which they are given the freedom to make their own decisions regarding production, consumption, marketing, pricing, borrowing, lending, and investments. In summary, the advantages of liberalization are the following. Number 1, increase in foreign investments. Number 2, increase in efficiency of domestic firms. Number 3, rise in the economic growth. And number 4, control of prices. So that's the advantages of liberalization in the Philippines and in other countries. While the disadvantages are as follows. Number 1, increase in unemployment. Number 2, loss to domestic unit. Number 3, increased dependence on foreign nation. And number 4, unbalanced development of sectors. Okay, so that's the disadvantages of liberalization. Additionally, it could lead to a greater explosion or exploitation of the environment. Example given, greater production of raw materials, trading toxic waste to countries with lower environmental laws. Infant industry argument, trade liberalization may be damaging for developing economies who cannot compete against the trade free. So that's additional disadvantages of having liberalization. Whereas in the Philippine setting, trade liberalization program began in 1981 and reduced industrial protection and administered through high tariffs and import regulations. Tariffs were thus lowered and a good number of imports were liberalized. So in summary, trade liberalization has its own pros and cons when it comes to economic development. It is for us, the people and the government, to balance what is good for our economy and our environment. It is in our hands in making decisions that will affect not only the present generations but the future as well. So that's my topic, for World Trade Organization and liberalization. So thank you and God bless us all.